Reimagining Success, episode 210. You're listening to the Reimagining Success podcast, where we help you design a business and a life that allows you freedom from the 9 to 5. I'm your host, Anna Lundberg, ex-corporate good girl, now a business mentor and coach, author, mum of 2, and I'm here to help you create more freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment. Now let's get started with redefining success outside of the 9 to 5.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's interview. I'm here with Molly Sider, who's coming all the way from Chicago. So, Molly, let's dive straight in. I'd love for you to tell us, what were you doing in your previous life, as it were, and what are you doing today?
Hi, Anna. Thank you for having me. So my previous job for a long, long time was in the wine industry. So I've worked on pretty much every part of the wine industry, from serving wine at your table in a restaurant to importing and distributing and everything in between, making wine, picking grapes, all the things. And now I make podcasts and I'm a life coach.
So wine, I have to say, sounds like quite a dream job. So I have to ask, what was it that led you to pivot in the direction? As much as I love life coaching, drinking wine and serving wine sounds pretty dreamy too. So what was it that drove that change for you?
It's a very fair question. When I say the wine industry, everyone's like, oh, that sounds terrible. You know, if anytime I was like, oh, I'm tired of my job, everyone's like, really? Like, that sounds, you have to drink wine all day. Like, that sounds really terrible, Molly. But the reality is, you know, it was a job like any other.
Yes.
And there are really, really wonderful things about the wine industry that I miss. But it's also a hard job. I always say nobody gets into the wine industry to make a lot of money. You have to be really passionate about it because it's hard to make money. It's not impossible, but, most of the time I find to do so, and again, like, there are exceptions to this rule, but most of the time, you know, that means you have to work for, you know, companies or with products that, let's just say maybe are misaligned with your values. So there's that. It's also, you know, it's really exhausting. It's hard on you physically. It's a lot of eating and drinking, which is a blast. But when you have to do it for your job all the time, constantly, it's not the healthiest. And so I did it for a really long time and I loved it a lot. And I also felt like maybe I wasn't going to be able to do this forever. I was in it for about a little over 13 years, probably. And it sort of ended. There was sort of a string of events, but I was starting to feel like, I don't know that I can keep up with this forever. I was also getting a little bit bored in my position. And I was talking to other companies and realizing I was probably going to be doing fairly the same thing in other companies. You know, maybe they would be a little bit bigger. Maybe I'd have a little bbit more responsibility because of the difference. I was working for a tiny company, but I probably wouldn't be making much more money. And I didn't feel like I was growing anymore. And then there were like all these, you may not know about this, but there were all these like tax import, or these import taxes that were happening that like the Trump administration was like all of a sudden just throwing on the wine industry for reasons that are long and don't really make sense. And that was really putting a strain on the industry. And then we went right into the pandemic. And I also, my company was super small and we had been in a lawsuit for almost the entire time that I was working there. It was a whole string of events. So the beginning of the pandemic happened and my boss was like, I can't pay you anymore. Like, I just can't do this right now. We don't know what's happening. And it wasn't that surprising, and it was sad, and it was also a relief. And I think also because it was the beginning of the pandemic and, you know, no one was really doing anything. Everything shut down and no one was really working and no one knew what was happening. It was actually, because it was an opportunity for me. I mean, it was hard and it was scary and I was like, what's going to happen? And also I was like, well, there isn't anything I can do right now, but sit in this space and figure out what I really, really want in my life. And so it ended up being a wonderful opportunity, but Anyway, from there, I had also like recently been out, or I had just ended a relationship because of the pandemic, and I was kind of like just alone in my feelings, in my apartment by myself. I had no job, I had no relationship, and I'm like, oh man, what do I do? And what do I want? And it forced me to take a really hard look at myself and, pinpoint the things that I wasn't happy with, that I wanted to change. And from there, I had already gotten really into, I was already maybe a couple of years into like positive psychology and mindfulness and consciousness stuff. And that just, being in the beginning of the pandemic and losing all of those things and not knowing what was coming next really just like catapulted me into this like world of like, okay, I want to learn all the things. I want to grow. I want to be the best human I can possibly be. And I also want to help other people do that. And so that's where that came from. And then the podcast, that's how I got into the life coaching thing. And then the podcast, I have a podcast that is about people who make big life changes beyond the age of 40. So it's like proof that it's never too late and you're never too old, and just go do that thing. And that idea came to me a few years before this, when I was approaching 40. And I was again, like just out of a like on and off again relationship that I wasn't super happy with. I was still enjoying my wine job, but I also was starting to feel like, okay, I don't think I want to do this forever. And I'm going to be 40. And like, I'm like, is this it? Did I screw this up? Did I miss the boat? Like, is there any chance for me to, still figure out something else and to make changes? And I needed to hear other people's stories, and I needed that representation. I needed that content, and I couldn't, and I am a big podcast listener, as I'm assuming you are also, and everyone listening. And I specifically wanted it in podcast form, and I couldn't find it. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm just going to have to do this myself. But I also had no idea how to make a podcast. And so it took a few years to, not just figure out like how to like the technology and all that stuff, but really work up the courage to start a podcast. And that also sort of happened as I was going through this, life coaching training and working with like a team of coaches who were like, why aren't you just doing that now? Like, what would happen if you just put this podcast out tomorrow? Thinking through all these things. And so eventually I did that. And so now then I didn't think I could ever make money off of a podcast or doing podcasts. I was like, oh, this is just like a side job. This is just a hobby because I need this information and maybe somebody else will too. Which turns out was true. But, then eventually, it dawned on me that like, oh, I can actually do this for a career. And it's so fun because, just like you, again, like listening to people's stories. I'm also a storyteller. So I like get up on stages and tell true personal stories, like the Moth style. And it's one of my favorite things to do. And it's like, I love listening to people's stories. And I think it's the best way for connection and community and empathy and equity and all those things. And so to get to do that for a living is like a dream.
Okay, that sounds better than wine. I get it. My goodness, there's so many things to unpack. I have to say, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say that was like a very long-winded answer for like,
it was, yeah. So I'm going to try
anymore.
One of the key points that I wanted to reiterate, but everyone else can go back and listen again because there were lots of insights there. But I personally, it hits me a little bit because when this episode goes out, I would have just turned 40. So that's, my pivotal moment.
Great.
And also the way you selfishly use the podcast to learn and connect with other people. That's exactly what happened when I first started my interview series. I did not know about podcasts at the time, but this was, 10 years ago or so. And I started speaking to other people who had quit their corporate jobs totally selfishly to inspire me and reassure me that it was possible. And there are other people like that. And it's by far been my favorite thing for the past, almost 10 years of connecting with people like you who I'd never otherwise have met and hearing these stories. And of course, as my business evolves, also the people I speak to have evolved. And in fact, we've also just come up to 4 years since that book was published where I had those stories. So we're also reflecting on how people have evolved. And of course, there are massive success stories of people growing empires and multiple businesses and living in their dream house. There are some people who've gone back to a job. Some people, most of us, I think, are somewhere in the middle. But it's so interesting to explore those changes. Going back to the very beginning of what you said, I really wanted to highlight the piece on it is just a job at the end of the day, because I think a lot of us think, oh, but if I change, and in my case, it was I'll go to an interview for the coffee industry or chocolate industry, the movie industry, and ultimately would be the same culture, same system. Yes, it'd be fun if I go to a movie premiere or something. That's still on my bucket list to walk the red carpet. Let's see if that happens. But, ultimately, you're working in the same environment. The salary is around the same, you're not changing enough. And I think to have the maturity and the self-awareness to know that change isn't enough is really impressive. And then I suppose often we are forced in a way, and it sounded like a perfect storm. You listed about 100 reasons why you moved out of it. So it sounds 100% like the right decision for you. But there were what I call the push reasons that push you out, and also reasons pulling you towards something. And it sounds, as you said, it was a relief because they kind of forced you to make a decision. It sounds quite reactive in a way, which is interesting because I always find it difficult. When is the point that you choose to redefine success, as I call it? And often it is in response, sometimes to a promotion, ironically. You get everything you dreamed of and you realize it's not what you want. Redundancy, breakup, illness, that becoming a parent. So long-winded question, I guess. But in terms of redefining success, how has over this time your definition of success evolved? What does it mean to you today, and how is that different to maybe when before you turned 40 and in your previous existence in the wine business?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And a lot of the things that you just said are things that I talk about all the time. Like, how do you know when to switch, and how do you know when to shift? And like, if you've been trying for something for so long, how do you know when is the right moment to try something new? But really what you're asking is my definition of success and how that's changed. And it's changed dramatically. I think, I talk a lot about identity. And so for me, really knowing who I am and what my values are, and identifying as that rather than what my job is, what my title is, what my relationship status is, whether I'm a parent, those things are nice and they're part of, who you are, but when you strip those things down in a way, like, who are you at your core, is how we, or I guess it's how I stay centered, and it's how I define my success, because I'm living my values. I am still in transition, really. I'm still, when are we not in transition, really? But I'm still, working towards creating this bigger idea of a career for me in this medium, in this industry. But what it's allowed me is to really live my true values, and show up to the world how I identify myself every day, no matter what the situation is. And to me, that's the biggest form of success, that I get to do that I know who I am, that I understand it, and that I'm able to come back to that no matter what the situation is, no matter who I'm talking to, no matter what happens in my life. I can apply those things. I can apply my identity to my job. I can apply my identity to my relationships. But if something doesn't work out, if at the end of the day, like, I decide to, end my podcast next year or whatever, which I'm not planning on doing, but, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything about who I am or my worth or my value. It's, it doesn't change me at my core. That's what I think success is. That's my definition. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100% does. I really resonate with that. And I love that kind of authenticity of being able to show up 100% with you, with my clients, with my partner. I'm the same person always. And I love that. And I think obviously quitting a big corporate job, I think we lose the big title. And it took me a few years to not say, I used to work at this company, or I'm a digital marketing consultant, because that sounded more, taking on a mantle like coach, or starting to say I'm a writer tentatively. It takes confidence, a podcast host. So I love that idea of being core to who you are, also because I, as many women I'm sure, have maybe lost myself a little bit becoming a mother. I was saying to someone the other day that when you're always when I was always walking around with a buggy, everyone sees you and they automatically see you as a parent, and somehow finding space and time in your life to still be an individual is so important. I was single for most of my life, so the re-identifying then as being a partner with someone is also a change. But remembering that you are, and of course you can evolve, but remembering who you are, getting clear on that and staying core to that. As you say, I can be a best-selling author, a podcast host, but if that isn't the case, that's also fine. You're still worthy and lovable, and all sorts of other things going on. So I think it seems so simple, but I think it's harder than it sounds to know who you are and to stay true to that.
Yeah, it's not easy. Like you just said something about how, you used to feel like you needed to be like, oh, I used to be this position. But like, I still have moments like that for sure. Like, oh, this is what I'm doing. But I used to be in the wine industry. I mean, I catch myself in those moments. It's not like that stuff just goes away automatically. It might not go away overnight. It may not ever go away. But the point is that you can, recenter and refocus faster and easier. It gets easier and easier. You notice more when you're doing it. You're like, oh, look at me. I just fell back into that mindset or that moment, and, have a laugh.
And it's also funny, I wonder, do you have a question that you ask people instead of, so what do you do? Because that's one of those classic things. I met someone once who asked me, so what lights you up? And I love the question, but I've never quite been able to bring myself to ask the question myself. But what would you say to someone rather than, labeling someone by their job description? What, out of curiosity, do you have a...
do you mean in what sort of context?
I suppose if you're meeting someone, I suppose at a dinner party, I haven't been to a dinner party in so long, so I don't know whether, but if you meet, I guess often the first question is, oh, so where do you work? What do you do? And you right away go, and that's where it gets a bit fluffy. If you're doing many different things, multiple hats, you don't want to be pigeonholed, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. What do I ask? It's always a gazillion questions. I'm one of those people, I have a feeling you are too, that at dinner parties you're doing most of the asking, most of the questions. But I think I often probably start with something simple, like where are you from, or where do you live, or something like that. And I feel like, and it's a boring answer, sorry, but but I think that just more naturally, it's you got to ease in.
Yeah. Do the easy things. I like it.
Yeah, but I was interviewing somebody the other night for my podcast, and he said, and he's also a friend of mine, and he was saying he was in a group recently. It's a long story, but he was in a group recently with a bunch of people. It was a bunch of singles, and they were all, doing the chit chat, well, where are you from? What do you do? Whatever. And he was he asked, what's the emotion that scares you the most to show? And I was like, what a good question.
That's a deep question, but good. It's certainly in a dating context or something to get people intimate right away.
Yeah. He was like, what are we doing here? This is a singles, group. Let's get in it.
Wow. Yeah. No, I can't. I'm not going to be able to steal that one either, but I like the intent of it. I'll have to come up with my own. But I do think I agree with you, starting simple and then finding common ground, right? You can have whole conversations with someone without ever hearing what they do as a job. And I think that's quite telling. And that's more interesting. I think part of the next question you've already answered in staying true to yourself and knowing yourself. But as we all know, there are some ups and downs when we're working for ourselves, as there are in life in general. But of course, we might be flying quite freely, especially if you're transitioning, you're still early-ish days and things are always evolving. So how do you think you've been able to build your confidence as a podcast host, as a life coach, and someone who can monetize this, I suppose, and also, I guess, from a business resilience perspective, but really as a as an individual? How have you developed the confidence, and how do you bounce back from any setbacks that come along?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. There are a lot of ways. I think the biggest, most important thing for me, and what I would maybe advise everybody is to find your team or your support system. For me, I'm always talking about my team. You know, we can't do anything alone. Like if you go to my website, one of the first things I say is, you know, we can't do life alone. We're not supposed to do life alone. And also, what a relief. I think a lot of times we think we're supposed to like, you know, muscle through whatever emotion we're feeling or whatever obstacle we're facing. And the fact is we can't do it alone. We're just not built like that as humans. And, you know, one of the fastest ways to regulate the nervous systems when you are feeling insecure or fearful or, you know, overwhelmed or like just underwater in any way. First you have to regulate the nervous system. And the best way to do that is, you know, interpersonal communication. In other words, just talking to people and like, oh, okay, I can do that. I can talk to people. Like, that's what I love to do. Like, what a relief. No one can get anywhere. I mean, I guess you can get somewhere by yourself, but you're really limiting your ability to get to like the big places and the big spaces if you're really just trying to do it alone. We need each other. So I have a team of people. It changes all the time. That's okay. I have coaches. I have therapists. My boyfriend has become a huge support system for me. I have an old friend of mine that I grew up with. I think we've known each other since we were like 0. And I have a great friend from college and, you know, my sound engineer. Like I have this like team of people, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's like just because you have a best friend or, you know, a sister you're close with or whatever, that they're necessarily going to be on your team right now. And that's okay. It's, you know, for me, it's been finding the people who I can, you know, be my most authentic self with. I know that sounds, you know, kind of cheesy, but like, or cliche, but like, it's true. Like find the people who you can go to. Or for me, it's been finding the people who I could go to when I'm really feeling underwater and I'm like, hey, I need you to help me pull me out of this pool. And then also like understanding the things that understanding and recognizing the things that I'm not good at and I'm not interested in learning to be better at, you know, and finding the people who can help you do those things. Like we can't, you know, all do everything. And especially, you know, something I think, you know, like starting a podcast, there's a gazillion different things to do. And it's, you know, all this new technology, I didn't know how to do any of this stuff before I started, you know, now I'm, you know, fully editing my podcasts and mixing and mastering and doing all the things. But I'm also like, I don't know how to do sound engineering. I don't know how to make this thing sound like the voices level. And, you know, my friend who's a sound engineer is now my sound engineer. He's like an incredible musician and music producer. And he's been doing this his whole life. And he like, you know, took his computer and he's like, let me just like show you this and that. And I was looking at it and I'm like, how much would you charge me? Because it's just not worth my time to figure this out. I'll never understand it like you do. I'd rather just pay you, like that type of thing, you know? But also just being willing to be vulnerable and admit when you need help and when you're not okay. You know, we all, I think, have these moments where we just want to like curl up in a ball and like hide under the covers or whatever when we're just like, I don't know what to do next, or just, you know, those feelings of like, what am I doing? This is never going to work. Or maybe I should just go back and get a job in the wine industry again, or, you know, whatever. All those moments are going to happen and they're normal. And, you know, you're not alone in it. Like they happen to everybody. And so understanding that and being willing to share what you're going through and your story, and then also asking questions and how other people have gone through it. And, knowing that it's possible, like all of those things, because it's hard. It's really hard.
I think that's such an important message, and coming at it from different angles, both in terms of tech support and emotional support and so on, right? And I had a client say that the other day. She was working through one of my course materials, and she was saying, I've just realized I'm kind of expecting my partner to be all these things, to be obviously a romantic partner, but also accountability partner who's being strict with me, and cheerleader who believes in me every day and supports me, and also a mentor, but that's really, unfair, and a friend, and so on. We're putting a lot of pressure on that one person. And as you said, it might not even be someone in your immediate group, because they might not have the experience. It might not be quite the right place. They can be incredible for disconnecting and so many other wonderful things, but actually you do need mentors in particular areas. You need the people who have kind of been there, done that. You need people who are in the jungle with you, who are sharing the same ups and downs, right? So I think that's really important to know. And it's something that comes up again and again in my group program. People always say, unfortunately, they appreciate my mentorship, but really it's the community that is the main thing, right? Feeling that you're not alone, hearing what other people are going through and so on. And that's really important.
Yeah, exactly.
And more concretely, then, you mentioned, wow, I can make money with my podcast and my coaching, of course. So what is it? What does your business model look like at the moment?
So I think, so it's been a journey. And as I said, I'm still in this, I'm still in the journey and the transition. But it sort of started because somebody hired me to make them a podcast. This was probably a year ago. And it was a CEO for a startup here in Chicago. And he heard my podcast and he was like, oh, I like it. I like your voice. Would you make a podcast for me? And I was like, me? Sure. And so I did. And it was such a fun experience. And I thought, oh, wow, like I can do, like people would actually pay me to do this. I don't even, I feel like I'm so new at this. And so it's been this journey of figuring out like which thing, like what do I want to focus on? And so I make people podcasts, small businesses, startups and stuff like that. People are companies who want to make podcasts for marketing purposes of their service or thing they're selling, whatever. I help them sort of structure it and do all the editing. And I, of course, have my sound engineer who's amazing. And simultaneously working on building my own podcast and building and growing the audience. And simultaneously, working as a life coach and helping people kind of do the same thing. It's a lot of talk about like through transitions, but it's really a lot of talk about getting down to like, who are you? What's your identity? How do you want to show up to the world every day? And in terms of like structure, it's funny because, for me, I have to structure my week and my days. Like specifically like, okay, in the mornings I work on this thing and then, I go to the gym, and then in the afternoons I work on this thing. And then the next day, just the whole day I work on this other thing. And because there are three things that I'm trying to like cycle through. And it's a challenge because stuff happens and things come up, and all of a sudden you have somebody who you want to interview, but they can only do it on the one day that you're supposed to be working on this other thing. And then you have to so it's a constant sort of challenge, but it takes a lot of planning. My boyfriend always says, planning is doing. And it's really true. And it's really helpful, to create this specific plan of like, what does your week look like? And what are you working on when, and trying to stick with that, but then also leaving room for some sort of flexibility. For me, at least, that's important, because flexibility is actually a value of mine. And a reason why, like one of the many reasons why I wanted to work for myself is, I think probably that's similar to other people. So, not just flexibility in like the job and like where you work, but also flexibility in your day to day and hour to hour.
I'm a big fan of loose structure too. I get such rebellion, people who don't want to have any structure and schedule. But I just, from my own experience too, and we were talking about my podcast episode from a few weeks ago, when I first quit my job, I just had date and I had no idea what I was doing, and my days just stretched out ahead of me, and it was terrifying. It was exciting at the beginning. Oh, no alarm clock, and I can just read books and do whatever I want to. But actually, you're not going to achieve your goals if you're just kind of going where your energy is that day. So a little bit of loose structure, but then the flexibility too. Yeah. I think that's a really good combination.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yes to those things. I was exactly the same way. And I sometimes can like fall back into that. Like I'll notice like a day or a week where I'm like, oh man, this has been like a much looser structure than is really what I want and what would be productive. But having accountability is really helpful. Like having someone actually, for me, to be like, hey, I'm going to like by the end of this week, I'm going to have all these things done. And I want you, I'm going to check in with you at the end of this week so that, I definitely do it because you're going to hold me accountable. And it's just
who is that? Is that your partner? Or is that you've got a paid program you're in, or how are you getting the accountability at the moment?
The accountability lately has been my boyfriend. But also I have 2 coaches and a therapist. So I will often, and I'm close with them and they allow me, and not everybody will have this relationship with the coach or therapist, but I do it where I'm, we actually we'll text each other or email each other. And so I can text, my coach and be like, okay, I did this and that. And, she'll just like acknowledge like good thumbs up, because I also am the type of person, like, I'm a people pleaser. I don't want to let anybody down. And it's a lot easier for me to show up and be reliable and a hard worker for other people. And it's much harder for me to do that for myself. And so that's a problem when you're working for yourself. So it's really, really important and really helpful to have that, those people are part of my team. They also hold me accountable. So there's all sorts of like little tricks.
Yeah.
But find those tricks because they are the only way.
Yes, exactly. And it could be via rewards, right? I was talking to a client, can you give yourself, she's going to give herself, not give herself, but actually go for a pedicure once she's finished a particular task. Something like that. We have to sort of trick ourselves, as you say, because we don't have the team of the bigger organization and so on. And I, again, love this team. I had someone else talk about having kind of a board of advisors, which sounds very glamorous or very sort of formal, but it's the same concept of having different people who are supporting you in different areas and who you can rely on, I suppose. One final thing I did want to dig into was obviously you've pivoted and we talk about identity and so on and we did touch on that briefly in terms of the job title, but in terms of establishing your credibility and building a presence in new space, evidently your podcast just organically attracted people who wanted what you had to, and you didn't even know you had it to offer. But what have you done proactively, I guess, to build your personal brand and your credibility in these new spaces as a coach, as a podcaster and so on?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of, first of all, I think it's mental, like it's like, gaining that confidence to recognize that like, oh, I am an expert on this topic now, and
that's hard, right? Actually saying I am an expert is hard for some people.
Yeah, it's really hard. And it's really hard. It's been, another big challenge for me, like social media. I'm not like great on social media. I don't love to do it. But also part of that has always been like, well, there are all these people who have known me as a wine professional for so long. And now I'm going to just go out and say I'm a podcaster and a life coach. Like they're never going to believe me. What will they think? Like all of those insecurities and fears. And so it's taken me, it's really like the mental blocks for me, have been the biggest obstacles. And so now I'm all of a sudden like, it started with just doing the podcast with asking lots of questions. And now I'm realizing, or I know like, okay, I'm the one who's doing all the research on this stuff. I'm the one who's, listening to people's stories. I'm the one who's been studying this now for, however many years. I'm now an expert in this topic on this field. And so the more I talk about it, the more I do things like this, and the more I work on my podcast and life coaching, and I see people like reacting, and I understand the influence that I'm having, the more confidence I get and the easier it is to sort of market yourself. But it's been for me, it's been a lot of word of mouth. It's been a lot of research and reaching out to people, like reading articles, like New York Times articles, and reaching out to people, and they're like, cool, I love what you're doing. Yes, I want to do this with you. That's been how I've been doing it for the most part up until now. And now I'm really like just going gung ho for social media and like diving deeper into that realm, which is really scary for me. But I feel so much better and more confident because I now feel like I have, the credibility, I have the experience, I have, and it's different for everybody. Like I know people who are like, I'm a life coach. I've coached 10 people. I don't have a credential, but whatever. And that's great and awesome. And that's not me. I'm very much the person who, I value experience and credentials and all that stuff. And so it's taken me, more time to build that up, but now I have that foundation and it's mine, and you can't take it away from me.
Well, I love that because you've explored the different elements of credibility, right? There is the traditional, and I think most of us with integrity and with that upbringing, I suppose the academic kind of background, hold on to those credentials, and we want to have that from an ethical perspective, and that is still the formal meritocratic way that people judge, I suppose, and that gives us confidence and the integrity, the ethical perspective. On the other hand, the mere act of launching a podcast establishes you an expert, and as you say, as soon as you speak to people, you're reading and so on, you're more and more building that. So I think that's a fantastic platform. Just like writing a book, you can self-publish a book, and by definition, you're now an author on that topic, right? So there are many different ways of building your confidence and your credibility. And then the fact that you're now going out into social media, as you say, hopefully then you can feel more confident and not feel too icky about promoting yourself, because you know that you can stand by it and you have the testimonials and the experience and so on to support that.
Yeah.
Well, Molly, I could talk to you for a long, long time, but I will try to wrap up. And I just want to say a massive thank you for sharing your stories. So many insights that resonate and of course, some different perspectives there as well. So I really appreciate your time. I guess any piece of advice, one piece of wisdom, and you've given so many already insights, but somebody who is maybe coming in, well, in fact, let's go with your target audience, right? Someone who is in that sort of wondering, is it too late for me? Is this all there is? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say, of course, no, it's never too late. I think that, there's so much, obviously so many things, there's so many pieces of advice, but maybe the biggest one would be like, if you're feeling like, I'm not really sure, I'm not super happy with where my life is or where I am in life right now, I want to change, I'm not really sure how to or what that might look like. Or maybe you have an idea, but you're not sure how to like go about it. Like, I think really figuring out what your true values are. Like, I think so many times when we're feeling, down or just like, unhappy or whatever the, not great feelings are, is because our values are misaligned. We're living values that are not really ours. They might be somebody else's placed upon us. So I think like really getting down to like, what do you like when no one else is looking and no one else is listening, what do you value most? And where in your life are you living those values and where are they missing? What are the holes? Find the holes. And that's a really good place to start to figure out like, what to change and what to work on. And the second piece would be, find your team.
Yes.
If you can afford it, hire a coach. because we need people, and get really, really comfortable. It's really scary, but get really comfortable at sharing your story, because I promise you, you are not alone. I promise you, if you're feeling something, most likely a lot of other people are feeling the same way. You are not alone. So I think those are big things.
And that's the best way to connect with people, right? I think we try to show up as this perfect sort of expert. And I think it's easy for me I come from a marketing background, so I'm quite comfortable with social media, almost too much so. And it's all very formal, and this is how you do this and so on. And then perhaps missing some of the warmer, vulnerable storytelling side of it. So I think that's very interesting. And I love the values exercise. I remember when I first did it, a coach recommended it to me when I was beginning to explore changing and so on. And it was so clearly things that were a reaction to the situation I was in. And it was very clearly a gap. And it's not something you think about. It seems so obvious now in the coaching space. But I think coming from outside of it, it's not something I would ever consider. Values, I mean, I'm not that religious. I wouldn't really think of values. I mean, I'd like to think I have integrity and so on, but it wasn't something that I think most of us do. So I'm really happy to hear that as advice. And it's such a strong guiding star to drive the direction, rather than going, oh, I need this other job, or should I apply to this and so on. It's just a totally different lens through which to see the world. So yeah, super valuable perspective. Thank you.
Yeah.
So again, thank you so much for your time. Where can we find you? Perhaps on social media, now that you're dipping your toes there. Where do we find your podcast, website? Where should we go?
Yeah. So you can go to my website, which is just mollysider.com. You can go to my podcast website, which is, the podcast is called I Am This Age. And so there's a website, just www.iamthisage.com. I'm on Instagram at IamThisAge_podcast. My personal is, oh my God, what is it? MC Cider, at MC Cider. And I'm also on Twitter. I Am This Age podcast on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, all the spaces now.
Amazing. Well, I'll put some of those at least in the, where are you even?
I was going to say, I may even venture into TikTok at some point. I don't know, who knows?
I've sort of dipped my toes there. I'm not very consistent. I kind of half-heartedly post some things sometimes. It's quite tricky to stay on top of all these channels, but that is the future. So we're going to have to play with it. At the end of the day, though, it's just the technology and the tool, right? The message is consistent, and people have been super successful actually with really serious and engaging content on those platforms. So it's hopefully still possible to connect with people, albeit within the space of just 1 minute or 90 seconds, which is a bit more limiting. I was going to say, I think the best place for people to find you is, and I'd encourage you to, as you said, as an avid podcast listener, to find the I Am This Age podcast, and then we can link to all the other links there as well. But that sounds like a really good place to start. And I think so many synergies and parallel stories. I mean, I work with clients who are in their 50s or so. And again, I'm now going to approach, or have approached, that age myself. So I'm going to need to, well, not need to, but I would like to reevaluate and see where I am and what might be next on the horizon in the next decade. So,
and I can have you on my podcast.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I'll make a big change so I get to come on and share it with the post-40 crowd with you. I want to be part of your team. Thank you very much for the offer. I'll take that as a challenge and see what I can come up with. But thank you really, Molly. So beautiful, so many insights, and best of luck. And of course, congratulations on your success now, which of course is independent, as we said, of any particular external accolades, but really rather congratulations on finding out who you are and being true to that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure to be on here, and I love this podcast and what you're doing, so keep it up.
Thank you.
Are you at that point where you're asking yourself, is this really what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? And the answer is a resounding no, but you're not yet sure what you want to do instead. I get it. I was in your shoes back in 2013 when I took a good hard look at myself and my CV, and up until then I'd followed the conventional path. Good school, good university, good job. I was also single while more and more friends around me were settling down with partners and babies. Now fast forward to today and I've built a coaching and consulting business. I've published 2 books with more on the way. I've launched a podcast. But more than that, I've been able to travel the world. I've made more time for friends and family. And I've designed and shaped a location-dependent business and a lifestyle that's 100% tailored to my own personal definition of success. Oh, and I've also moved countries, I've fallen in love, and I've had 2 beautiful little children. So if you want to redefine what success looks like for you, then get in touch to book a call, onestepoutside.com/call, onestepoutside.com/call, and I'd like to help you do just that.